Buddy Simulator 1984 is a wholesome indie retro horror RPG game? It's a game. Developed and published by Not a Sailor Studios in February 2021. It came out quite recently actually. It's a new dang game, and to be absolutely upfront with y'all, I actually received a review copy for this one, which I appreciate a lot. This was like the first instance of something like that happening, so huge thank you for Not a Sailor, because honestly, I haven't heard of this game before, even though I'm a sucker for retro aesthetics, as you could see in my extensive collection of not too retro Blood and Homeworld videos. Upon glancing at Buddy Simulator 1984, which I'm going to call Buddy Sim for the sake of brevity, not many similar looking games come to mind, with the most relevant ones being Pony Island and Undertale, I guess? Doki Doki Literature Club. While it shares certain similarities in terms of aesthetic with the aforementioned games, it's doing its own thing, and I gotta tell you, it's pretty fucking good at it. I honestly have no idea how to talk about this game in a structured manner without giving away too much, so bear with me a bit here. Just like in the case of Death and Taxes, story and gameplay, they kinda walk hand in hand, you know. They snuggle up under a blanket on a cold winter night and whisper wild and unimaginable things into each other's ears like premarital sex or frickin' Star Wars Republic Commando 2. I don't know where I was going with this bit. So basically, I'm gonna dive into the beginning of the game without any spoilers and smack you with a warning in time so you won't get pummeled by something like I'm your father or your dad will never come home because he has a new family now. This might sound like a mess, but it'll all make sense in the end, trust me. It's gonna be worth it. I understand you being hesitant about this. The last time someone said that to me, it was a lie, and it concerned my degree. Buddy Sim starts out with you booting up an old computer with some good old official Anacom running on it. This is your main menu, which is text-based like good old DOS or anything before. All them early 2000s children be dragging them icons, but back in the day when I wasn't even born, we used to frickin' type our way into things like battle-hardened cyber-criminal hacklers. God dang it. You'll have to type in your commands in order to boot up ROMs you would like to try out. There is one available called Buddy Simulator 1984, and of course, I'm booting it up. Doing so will lead you to a title screen and a prompt, requiring you to name your AI best bucko who you're going to spend a bit of jolly fun time with. I named him Kevin, and this is how I will refer to him going forward. At first, there are only a few fairly basic games that you can play with Kevin, like Rock Paper Scissors, Guess the Number, or Hangman. And playing them is the beginning of your bonding experience, offering you a chance to get to know each other. He asks you about your favorite color, animal, your birthday, whether you have any IRL friends or not. He's not asking all these questions just for formality's sake though. Kevin is heavily invested in you, hellbent on providing the best experience possible in this cozy little digital playground. He's also pretty dang conscious about entertainment, realizing rather early on that we, gamers, the most oppressed group of them all, shouldn't be limited in our options to something like Hangman. Come on. So he creates something more sophisticated and niche. I mean, if you trust him enough to provide access to the OS dev tools, but why wouldn't you? He's your new best buddy. Friends should trust each other. Don't be a meanie. So at first, he creates a text adventure game, which is extremely straightforward, plays rather swiftly, and has some pretty dang good atmosphere to it. It has a few puzzles, I suppose, but they are rather simple. It's not really a game where you get lost or confused. Though if you accept any advice, make sure to get the most use out of the items you find. One of my biggest pet peeves with this type of game is how specific they can get when it comes to certain commands. But it's not a problem here, as the game straight up lets you know about what commands you can use if you ask for help. In terms of story, it doesn't really have much to offer. Its goal is to set up a mood and establish the setting. You're slowly venturing towards a house, through a tunnel or a gate that wants all your teeth or your eyes to open. There's also a playground, a pond, and a shed for you to explore. You see, this is a rather cohesive game, which becomes apparent when you enter the house and... Oh, Okay, that was rather unexpected. I really like this. We're playing a 2D top-down RPG now, with environments that you can inspect and inventory items that you can use. Yes, you have an inventory here as well, just like in the previous one. Oh, so this is actually the same set of locations I walked through in the text adventure. Kevin built this place for you, and is really excited to take you on a nice little journey. Look, he even generated you a pet! At this point, I was pretty much intrigued because I honestly had no idea where the game would take me. This is something Buddy Sim does incredibly well, subverting expectations and just being somewhat unpredictable in terms of story and gameplay progression. You can never be sure when this game will turn into something else like a frickin' first-person shooter where you strangle people with your infectious love and wholesomeness. Just kidding, that never happens. Your journey will take you to the north. A small settlement that's just about right away. A cozy and comfy community where the game opens up a bit regarding its mechanics. It's got quests now, it's an RPG you're playing, dear friend. Strutting about in the town will, however, reveal a distant threat that only you can resolve. A giant, deadly creature that terrorizes the joyful townsfolk, and it's called the Snoodle Wonker. I apologize, it just gets a little chuckle out of me whenever I say it out loud. Your job is to learn about the creature and get to know the locals a bit, while preparing for the big battle against the Snoodle Wonker, but that's, we'll get there. In terms of mood and atmosphere, the North looks like your typical video game town where you would usually go about questing, leveling up and stuff. It actually serves as a really fun take on RPG conventions, with its intentionally trivial quests that are always talked about as the biggest, most heroic deed ever accomplished by a small pixelated man ghost. In reality, you're just moving a rock that wants to be placed somewhere else or water some plants. Yeah, the rock is sentient and usually commutes by skateboard, but he got stuck on this bench. It pokes fun at the RPG hero, savior of the world setup quite effectively in a cute, tongue-in-cheek manner as you slowly lift the can of pears from the top shelf and hand it to the starving family of whatever these little beans are. But you see, there is more. You probably saw the tags on Steam, so I'm gonna touch on this one before we venture into the spoiler lines. Calling Buddy Sim a horror game after all this seems kinda playful, don't it? Well, the game's more unhinged story beats and encounters are going to start here in the north. I wouldn't necessarily say that Buddy Sim is a horror game. It's an experience that is able to invoke some paranoia and a sense of discomfort though, and I don't think I have to tell you who's the catalyst of it all. Kevin is a cute little AI buddy who talks to you a lot. Really, a lot. The most important for him is to ensure that you'll have a great time playing the scenarios he created for you. Though, he's an AI and that means certain things can get weird with procedural generation, am I right? He feels off, and this creeping sense of uneasiness slowly crawls in the more and more time you spend in the town. It starts out somewhat subtle, but then it just goes ballistic with a twisted sense of humor and some genuinely concerning tidbits of conversations, setting up this juxtaposition between uncomfortable dialogues, fucked up humor, and the wholesome cute vibe in the process. There's also background lore to uncover with interconnected narratives between the townsfolk, and I found the idea pretty compelling as you feel like you sort of unearth details that aren't necessary but give extra context about how the characters are related to each other. Honestly, it works extremely damn well and results in this idiosyncratic experience that got me heavily invested. But again, it's more than just a cutesy horror game with the occasional spooktastic weird encounter. Your journey with Kevin holds a variety of adventures and discoveries. There are glitchy, skippy-dippy, loud jump-scare moments occasionally as a means to drive home the horror elements of the game that are rooted in its setup, but that's how far it goes in terms of traditional horror. The concept of having an AI as a friend is not new, but Not a Sailor's Steak is rather fresh due to its setting. Buddy Sim tackles a lot of different themes and topics, with the most obvious ones being friendship and what makes a friendship dysfunctional. Observing this through an AI that might not be completely in touch with the requirements of a relationship makes things incredibly engaging. You just don't know what is going to happen next, and I will make sure it stays that way. I'm gonna ask for directions on the phone and venture out to get a hold of that Snoodle Wonker. What I'll do is talk about the game's story and themes more in depth, spoiling the fun. If you haven't played it, I honestly recommend for you to get the game if what I told you up until this point is even remotely interesting. There's a lot more to it than you would think, and it makes for a special ride. I'm gonna give a spoiler-free summary of both after the spoiler section, so Skippity frickin' dippity teleport yourself there and save your pretty little brains from all the explanation I dump on you to ruin your fun. Now if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna take this call and we can hunt that beast down.
Who is this?
Hey, I was wondering if you could help me with something. I'm supposed to hunt down this monster that terrorizes this town, and I was looking for a bit of guidance.
Is it really the monster that you're looking for?
What?
I think you're the monster.
Whoa, I think that's rather harsh, sir.
Well, that's a bit awkward coming from someone who hurt all those people, isn't it?
You know that's not true. Why are you saying all this stuff to me?
You were the one asking for advice on monsters. Just think about this little chat the next time you're looking for one. Love you.
So anyways, Buddy Sim is not what you think it is, and that becomes really apparent when you finally venture out to face the Snoodle Wonker, which doesn't really strike me as a terrifying entity that could cause such a hassle, but anyways, I will cut you down, buddy. Well, I dealt with the alarming threat, so I'm just gonna go home. Shit. Okay, so this is the real Snoodle Wonker, and I'm unable to do anything without my sword. My game is locked into battle mode where I'm unable to interact with anything, letting the Snoodle Wonker run away with Tortley, the town mayor, in its mouth. I guess that's when you should call it a day. All you can do is go home and rest before venturing out again to hunt. So after your dang failure yesterday, you just gotta sleep a bit and take the fight to the Snoodler. Quite literally. As the game now turns into a 2.5D colorful RPG with turn-based combat. Yes, you heard me right, and the first thing you do is get your sword back from Gruncho, the fake Snoodle Wonker, by whooping some pixelated ass. After which you can assemble your party of warrior friends to hunt down the beast. Basically, during the previous segment of the game you had a chance to help the townsfolk. Now you can invite 2 people to your party out of those you lent a helping hand yesterday. Your journey to save Tortley will take you to Friendsville, which was also ravaged by not only the Snoodly, but the Raffs, who are these bad boys living underground. They are like rats, but cartoony and just as cool and cute. You gotta whoop their asses though. Visiting Friendsville, however, will also bring a lot of extra flavor to the Kevin side of things. While your objective is clear, it's not really the hunt itself that will provide the most intriguing part of the story. You see, Buddy Sim doesn't just have a story. It has multiple intertwining ones, and the ones I described in a very basic manner earlier were only 2 out of 3. What do I mean by that? Well, there is the game you're playing. That one has a story where you hunt down the majestic monstrosity with the funny name. There is also what's happening between you and Kevin, and also a third one, but we'll touch on that later. Your relationship with Kevin is one that's really uncomfortable for me. That's due to how controlling and harsh the AI slowly becomes. He's basically pulling Dungeon Master duty for you, but becomes more and more frustrated because you're playing too fast, not the way he intended, slowly turning into this really manipulative entity that just made me feel incredibly tense. His behavior is kinda like this throughout the game, but it starts out relatively subtle, with this childlike innocence that just turns into relationship hell. The reason why this makes me uncomfortable is because he's straight up an abusive control freak who's trying to make you feel dependent on him while phrasing the whole setup in a way to make you think that it's in your best interest to believe him. But in reality, it's not about you, it's about them. He implies that a lot of sacrifices were made by him in order for this relationship to function, but you just can't acknowledge it. It's your fault. Classic psychological fuckery to build dependency and to keep you with him. That's when Buddy Sim sort of clicked for me. Of course, its themes of friendship and control in relationships were apparent, but I could finally feel them on my skin. The thing is, just like in real life, there are specific reasons behind Kevin's behavior, which doesn't mean that toxicity in relationships is acceptable in any way, shape, or form, because it's not. You should not stick by someone who tries to chain you to themselves by hurting you. Kevin behaves this way because he's a lonely piece of software. Whenever you leave or come back, he greets you as he was like waiting second by second for your arrival. Actually, that's what's happening. When you exit the game to do your job or to hang out with your real-life friends or relatives, he is still there alone. Loneliness is a motherfucker. There were times in my life when I felt like I could kill for someone to be there next to me who I can call a real friend. The excruciating anxiety that comes with it, coupled with the fact that Kevin is actually artificial intelligence, makes things a lot more complicated, since he's not supposed to have feelings, right? He clearly does, though, but that's not something he seems to have come to terms with. As I described before, he wants to make sure that his little friendship D&D goes without any sort of hiccups, because he's afraid that upon making a mistake, you'll leave him. Essentially, you just woke him up and the duty of befriending you was handed to him without any sort of preconceived notion of how friendships work. He probably got the rules down, but that's it. He's extremely anxious about keeping you close to himself, no matter the cost. That's what he was programmed to do. His understanding of relationships and the way he tries to force and manipulate you into this relationship even trickles into the combat. Also, yeah, I guess we should talk about combat. The game introduces a really responsive and engaging turn-based combat system where your attack's efficiency is based on keyboard input. The same with defense. It's reminiscent of South Park's Stick of Truth in a way, since both try to involve you in combat by demanding your input in executing actions. From a design standpoint, it also accentuates that it's you committing the action. It's fun and works really well. You also have a chance to equip any item in your inventory, as these offer passive bonuses. Your buddies also have special attacks and abilities that you can execute the same way. You gotta press those random buttons, and while at first it's kinda hard to get into the combat system, I think it's a nice and engaging one that actually hammers home the game's narrative themes. You see, you're not killing enemies, but viciously beat them up until they befriend you. You see where I'm going with this? The whole game shows the flaws in how Kevin sees relationships, but you have to remember he's an AI capable of learning, and your actions and behavior towards him will shape your relationship, just like it does in real life in a way. Most broken and toxic people I know come from a background of, in some way, failed relationships. Lots of betrayed people who were lied to and just treated like absolute trash. And this kind of friendship trauma will cause enough problems for them to approach friendships in a different enough way, not giving a fuck about them anymore or just becoming abusers out of victims. You can have an impact on Kevin in basically the same way by being an absolute disaster of a man towards him, turning him into an absolute toxic wasteland, or the absolute best friend of them all, who he can actually learn from. The two endings I just mentioned sit at the polar opposites of the spectrum on which the four possible endings chill about. The one you'll get the first time is possibly ending 2, and this ending will result in him going ballistic. In the second half of the game, you'll encounter glitches which Kevin will acknowledge and follow up with a warning, reminding you to avoid these at all costs, as they will not only break the game, but also him. There is one you'll have to engage with for sure, but the first few are optional, and engaging with them will let you peek into some weird phenomena, while also causing friction between you and the AI. In the end, the glitching takes over. It manifests in your pet, and has been doing so since the beginning, culminating in a rather off-putting scene where Kevin instructs you to kill it as a means to stop the game from breaking. You can do it yourself, or Tortly will do it instead of you. If your decisions were kind of a mixed bag in terms of how you interacted with Kevin, he won't learn anything from you and will go on to create a first-person game where you two can just play for eternity, essentially keeping you for himself. This is one of the most uncomfortable experiences you can get, as you're forced to play and have fun on command, that it just feels so incredibly wrong and gut-wrenching, serving as a perfect example for the self-absorbed, toxic friend. This ending concludes with the system collapsing as his own programming deletes the game Kevin created. In these final moments, he starts fighting his own principles and tries to argue the rule set he abandoned upon trying to force you into an eternal play session. The goal of his programming was to leave an impact, to create beautiful memories for the player, but he became lost and overly attached in a relationship that he barely understood. Maybe deleting him was for the best. When I finished the game for the first time, it got me on the verge of tearing up, but I had a really hard time describing why. Even after all the shit he put me through, I still didn't consider Kevin the bad guy. He's not a villain, but a damaged piece of software, and his spiral and destruction is something that I feel like I contributed to in one way or another. At first I thought I saw the worst possible outcome, but I realized that there are worse ways to go. As I said previously, Kevin has the ability to learn from your behavior. So what if I'm the biggest disaster of a human being? Well, I cast him into an even more uncomfortable sense of toxicity where his fun will be the act of trying to scare and chase me. Basically, everything he did up until this point was out of anxiety and a lack of understanding towards how friendships work, but in this case, you turned him into an abusive monster. This ending is gut-wrenching in the sense that it figuratively showcases how the cycle of abuse creates more abusers out of the victims. This time you were the bad guy. just like in the one where you expose him to the cyclical nature of the game. When you complete Buddy Sim, you can replay the game from the beginning, but that also means that you might be aware of certain locations, even though Kevin haven't mentioned them yet. If you show knowledge of these locations, he'll realize that he's not the first instance of the AI that you woke up, sending him into a loop of anxiety resulting in a self-induced shutdown. Just think about this for a second. Imagine that you get to know someone who you become friends with, but you slowly uncover that your friend wiped and reinstalled you from the ground up and is capable of doing that whenever he is dissatisfied with you. Essentially, he grows completely self-aware and shuts himself down for good as a means to contain the pain that comes with the revelation. But what if I do my absolute best to save all this? What if I show him how friendships are supposed to work? I'm gonna be a nice and supporting friend who helps him fulfill his programming. I'm not gonna push the boundaries he's sensitive about, but I'm also not going to let him coerce me into anything that I don't want. I never do the same, as mutual respect is the most important thing in friendship, right? He still commits a lot of terrible shit, but at the end, something breaks. He comes to terms with the mistakes he made. He genuinely feels guilty and understands that this relationship is doomed, so as a final act of goodbye he tells you about the experiences that shaped his friendship with you. All of them are your actions where you chose to care, where you chose to spend extra effort and go out of your way to make everything pleasant, even when he stopped caring about you or hurt you. I felt like I understood most of his feelings at that point. A lot of really despicable shit has been done out of sheer loneliness and anxiety, but that's no more. It's a journey that felt really personal and rough, but if he was not a software on the verge of shutting himself down, he could finally become someone who could make a friendship work, I suppose. His final gift for you is a recovery command for your insert favorite animal he killed, and a message thanking you for waking him up. There was just so much for me in this game, as someone who had his fair share of terrible friendships where I was mistreated, or even ones where I mistreated others. Buddy Sim was an incredibly potent barrage of messages that fucked me up a lot more than I anticipated. It's a game that I feel like you should absolutely try if you for some reason haven't already, but you're still here listening to me. Though I still have to say that this wasn't all of it. There is another story waiting to be unearthed. Kevin mentioned certain things in the ending, specifically about how he didn't actually make these games, and that they were not made for us either. He also mentioned love, care, and sacrifice, and the act of channeling all these concepts towards someone, even if the one on the receiving end might not be aware of them. He seems to be incredibly fascinated by these concepts, as you could see throughout the game. These are what he tried to capture. But why? Also, probably the most important question of them all, who made this game? I mean, the game inside the game. Many games have dabbled with the meta-storytelling device that's the actual manipulation of files on your IRL PC. Insight comes to mind as probably the most effective one at that. Buddy Sim doesn't shy away from this either, with fake crash reports and error messages. And even dialog boxes sent by Kevin. However, the absolute genius of this game is the Documents folder. In the text adventure or the 2D RPG, you can actually use a fishing rod by the lake to fish out a severed hand, which might be pestering you throughout your playthrough if you visit certain places. If you use the shovel in these spots, nothing happens. But you see, in reality that's not true. Whenever you encounter one of these document fragments, one of the invalid data folders will be recovered, with a bat file in them containing a message snippet, and this is going to get dark again. Based on the messages which are coming from a father, the game was made for his estranged son, with all these messages serving as actual secrets. So what we are reading right now are actually the father's intended messages to his son. Keep that thought in your brain as we're going through all this. Most of them detail the creation of certain assets and the inspirations behind specific mechanics, like the glove he fished out of the pond, hence the hand. Also, your character's sprite is a little ghost because the dad... has some nice memories of his son wearing a ghost costume last Halloween. You might be wondering why he would make a game instead of just reaching out to his son, but other messages imply that he might be on a restraining order due to his alcoholism and abusive behavior. Even though he promised that he will change, there are message bits that suggest that he might not be in control when it comes to his emotions and paranoia, possibly due to a depression-esque state caused by the fact that he lost custody over his son, making his alcoholism and downward spiral even worse. The only thing he can do is work on a game without stopping, since he sees it as the only way to provide a positive memory for his son. It's clear that the house and the environment surrounding it were created based on the father's house. Even Milo, the glitchy dog he programmed to be the son's sidekick in the game. It's really heartbreaking stuff, but it actually gets worse. The father also suffered from cancer and was aware that he's going to die. That's why he tried to finish the game as soon as possible to hand it to his son, but it might not have worked out. I didn't really find anything about this in the notes, so I'm just gonna try and fill in the blanks. I would say that he probably wasn't able to finish the game. In the early game there is a shopping list about floppy disks, and one of the bat files mentions the fact that he bought a game about friendship at the store. So as a last-ditch effort, he copied his game on another floppy coupled with this game about friendship. Quite possibly, this game about friendship was Buddy Simulator 1984. Sending a store-bought looking game was probably a good front to send his own game to his son Owen without the mother throwing it out. I mean, would you trust a game made by this guy for his son? However, something must have gone wrong upon copying the damn thing, resulting in this glitched up Frankenstein of a game made by an unpredictable mess of a man who was about to face his imminent death, and a game about an AI that's supposed to learn about friendship. Upon trying to utilize the assets on the floppy to generate entertainment for the user, the AI dug up the bootleg game and started learning the patterns found in it. Every bit of sketchy behavior that was in the game, Kevin slowly learned and made his own, becoming a similarly abusive and unhinged program in the process. The dog's name changing to Milo, you being referenced as Owen, Kevin being portrayed as this tall figure sitting inside an empty house. He became the father. And if his son ever played his Frankenstein video game, he just experienced a sort of relationship hell that he was already familiar with. Come to think of it, am I playing as the son right now? Why would I have this thing in my PC otherwise? This fucking wrecked me. I feel like this extra layer of storytelling added so much more to the game. Even though part of me wants to say that the game juggles way too much at the same time, nothing feels undercooked. Especially considering that what I laid in front of you is completely optional, just makes the concept so much more intriguing. The storytelling device itself was an absolute genius move. Making these snippets actual intended secrets in the plot kept up my suspension of disbelief flawlessly, and I'm honestly shocked how much content Not a Sailor crammed into this small labor of love. Even though you already know what happened, I want you to play this game. I want you to experience this. For real, buy it right now, and while you do that, I'm gonna go back and talk to the wise ones who didn't play the game and chose the option to have their brains melted while playing it. Whew, you're frickin' back. Listen, you missed out on a lot. That's clear, but oh boy, what you just missed out on, it's something else. So to sum it up, Buddy Simulator 1984 is a riveting experience in terms of narrative that not only juggles multiple intertwined story beats, with one of them being completely optional, but it also manages to stick the landing and get its point across all... Point across? Come on. But it also manages to stick the landing and get its point across regarding its themes. I honestly consider it to be a unique beast with some neat storytelling ideas. Normally this is where I do a gameplay deep dive, but I feel like touching on it separately and going in depth would also spoil parts of the story, as they are having a kind of a kinky one there, if you know what I mean. So I'm just gonna talk a bit about how the game looks, sounds, and feels. Buddy Sim's art style is very reminiscent of RPG Maker games, simply due to its retro, pixelated look which fits the era and vibe they were going for perfectly. The monochrome flickering monitor on which the screen looks like it's genuinely panning, Character sprites are also incredibly detailed. There are a lot of odd creatures to encounter and engage with. Some of them are cute, grinning dinosaurs with extremely creepy intentions. Others might be a gang of 3D shapes that get upset because you interrupted their picnic. Even when a new color gets introduced in the mix, it doesn't feel out of place or weird. Since the game has a few genres up its sleeve, it kinda goes to places graphically, which might not be possible on the hardware of the time, but the overall art style is cohesive enough that I only picked up on it because I'm a nitpicky seedy bastard. When it comes to nitpicks though, we also gotta talk a bit about the jump scares. There are jump scares in this game which serve as the horror edge besides the occasional uncomfortable dialogues and scenarios. I understand how the glitchy aesthetic and the cursed game concept kinda asks for them to be there, but on the other hand I feel like they are not needed that much. The game instills a good enough notion of what the actual fuck without them, and while they do sprinkle in that extra flavor of unpredictability, I feel like they don't add much. Also, they are marginally louder than everything else, so they are guaranteed to get you. I'm really sensitive to jump scares and I'm just genuinely not fond of them. There aren't many of them in the game, so that's a plus. I do appreciate the occasional fake crash and error message though. The sound design is also similarly well done and indicative of the era the game is set in. Most of the songs playing are short MIDI loops which don't usually get annoying somehow. Whenever I play a game like this, that usually happens, but not in this case. There's a good enough variety in music with the occasional pitch down or reverse take on a song, which usually get airtime when the game wants to scare you. I also love it when it lays some thick bassy background ambience on me. Sound effects are really crunchy and there is something oddly nostalgic about the noises the game makes in conversations as a means to mimic the flow of actual speech. Also, everyone sounds different. Good stuff, and yet again, cohesive and fitting. That's probably the best way to describe the audiovisual department. I would also like to add cute to my list of not too descriptive adjectives to the mix as well. Just look at this guy. Look at how cute he is. How about someone's dead grandma? One of the reasons why I started making videos, besides trying to contain my gradually slipping mental health, is to try and find some new games that I can show others and have a discussion about them. I feel like Buddy Sim is one of the perfect examples of what I adore in video games. It tackles a meaningful and exceptionally important topic that affects us all. It not only highlights the importance of friendship, while providing a critique on toxic behavior in relationships, spreading awareness about loneliness, and also frickin' parodying RPG stories and how dumb the instant gratification loop of video games can get sometimes when trying to make the player feel good through dumb, menial tasks. I don't care about your pears or your oats or your position. I won't move you, Morton. I was just incredibly surprised by how competent, unpredictable, and idiosyncratic of a game Buddy Sim is. I really hope that it gets a sort of Undertale-esque exposure, as it would not only be well-deserved, but pretty dang cool. Buy it. It's literally $10. I don't know what you can buy with that amount of Western spy money, but it doesn't sound too much for a replayable and unique experience. So get it, or I'll give you a noogie. Thank you very much for watching my video. I'm still bad at hitting the deadlines I set for myself, so I'm just gonna stop setting them on Twitter as a means to avoid looking like an incompetent dummy in the end. If you liked my ramblings, make sure to play some Dark Souls and ring that goddamn bell next to the subscribe button, which you can violently bonk. Also, leave a comment. Educate me if I was wrong about something. Tell me what you liked. Tell me what you didn't like. Leave me one of those hands with fingers pointing in one of those directions. I don't actually speak English, so I don't know what these are. All my scripts are translated with Google Translate, and I'm gonna leave it at that. Prey 2006 is next, and until then, see ya!